Hello. Today is adding rational numbers, topic 4-3. We practiced today in class again adding integers, so it's adding in positive and negative numbers. We didn't really discuss the rules, but we do have this set of rules that we can use if you are not using the number line. You can always go back to the number line though and continue referring to that one. It says we use the same rules for adding all rational numbers as we did for adding integers. Because integers are rational numbers, you're going to follow the same rules that you would. So it says think DDSS. I also have another way I can talk about this too. If you think DD, if the signs are different, you find the difference and keep the sign of the number with a larger absolute value. So the two examples I have here, we have a -3 and a +2. And adding those together, I actually do end up subtracting them and taking the sign of the 3 because it has a larger absolute value. With the -5 + 9 = 4, I again have a positive and a negative, so I end up subtracting and taking the sign of the +9 to give me 4. If the signs are the same, you find the sum. So there's the SS, same sum, and you keep the sign of the number with the larger absolute value. So 3 + 2, both of those are positive, so I have 5. -5 + -9, both of those are negative, so I get -14. The other way that I refer to these sometimes, and you'll hear me say in class, is good guys and bad guys. Bad boys, bad guys. Good guys will be our positives, bad guys will be our negatives. So if the signs are different, meaning I have a good guy and a bad guy, they're on different teams. So if I look at -3 + 2, these would be bad guys, these would be good guys. Who are there more of? There are more bad guys, so my answer will be negative, and I would find the difference between the two to get -1. If the signs are the same, then they're on the same team, and so they just combine forces and keep their sign. So if I have a -5, that would be bad guys, and -9 would also be bad guys, so they stay bad, and I just add the numbers together. But again, also using the number line, which you guys have been practicing. What gets a little bit more challenging here is when we deal with adding or subtracting fractions, we do have to set them up in a specific order. So if I look at -3 + -9/4, I am thinking to myself my rules of addition for fractions. I have -3/4 + -9/4. I already do have common denominators, so I don't have to worry about getting common denominators. So how I like to rearrange these is I like to set the -3/4 plus, I like to circle the operation that I am doing in the problem so I don't confuse it with a positive or negative sign. And I like to set these up vertically. Since I have the same, again, denominator, I do not need to get a common denominator. And all I'm going to do is add the numerators of 3 and 9, which will give me 12 and 4. And since they're both negative, or since they're both bad guys, the answer stays negative. And I can reduce this even further to -12 divided by 4 to give me -3. And that's my final answer. On the next one, 5 1/10 plus -8 3/10. This is a good guy, bad guy scenario. So my signs are different, so I am going to actually have to take the difference or subtract. Now, don't write this down. If I was to put 5 1/10 plus -8 3/10, since my signs again are different, I'd have to subtract. And I can't set it up this way because if I took I can't take 3 away from 1 if I borrow from the 5, but when I borrow from the 5, I can't subtract 8 from there. So that is incorrect to set it up that way. So if I have -8 3/10 plus, again, 5 1/10, my signs are different. And because I know that I have to end up subtracting, I have to put the number with a larger absolute value first. Since that number is in the top, I know my answer is going to end up being negative. So technically you are subtracting even though I have circled that there's an addition sign here. So 3 - 1 will give me 2, 8 - 5 will give me 3, and I have my decimal, and again it's -3 2/10. Go on and want to try number 2. Okay. Again, this one turns into, I have negative 2 and 7/10 and 3 and 2/10. I have to look at which number has a larger absolute value and write that first and subtract the other number from it. So 3 and 2/10 plus negative 2 and 7/10. I'm actually finding the difference between these two numbers to give me 5/10. And again, if you just want to estimate your answer, kind of visualize on a number line, if we have 0, we have to go to negative 2 and 7/10 first. So I would start by going to the left. And negative 2 and 7/10 is roughly close to 3, so you can also estimate it that way. Then when I add a positive, I'm going to go back over here, but I'm only going to be going 3 and 2/10. So I'm not going to be going super far to the right past 0. So that's why it makes sense that I've only gone 5/10. My answer will be 5/10 at the end. Number 3 says that you plant a seed 3.5 inches below the ground. Find the sum of negative 3 1/2 inches plus 15 3/4 inches, and then what would the sum, or what does the sum represent? So if you plant the flower 3.5 inches below the ground, notice that right here there is no negative sign, but when they have you find the sum, they now have the negative sign right here. Of course, this is right to the addition sign. So there's a negative 3 1/2. So they are taking the below and showing the direction by putting a negative in front of the 3 1/2. So again, they only really want to know how high the flower is, so I'm going to subtract here. So I'm going to take the number with the larger absolute value, which is the 15 3/4. I'm going to add a negative 3 1/2. I do not have a common denominator, so I need to first do that to get a common denominator. So I'm doing LCM here again. What's the least common multiple between these? And between 4 and 2, it would be 4. So it's 15 3/4 plus negative 3, and to get from 2 to 4, I multiply by 2, so 1 times 2 would give me 2. Again, my signs are different, so I'm actually going to be subtracting. So 3 minus 2 will give me 1, and the 4 stays the same. 5 minus 3 is 2, and I bring my 1 down, and 15 has the larger absolute value, so my answer will be 12 1/4. And again, if you're looking at the diagram that they've given us, it really shows we don't want to include the 3 1/2. We don't want to include this part. We figured out the height of the flower above ground. Okay, I have 2 extra examples that I would like to also work on. So if at this point you could take out a piece of paper, you will need this for the questions at the end as well. So pause the video and take out a piece of paper. Okay, I'd also like us to practice 7/8 plus negative 4. And then I have another one. So 7/8 plus negative 4. Well, which one again has the larger absolute value? The negative 4. So I'm going to start by putting the negative 4 first, and then I'm adding 7/8. I'm not going to write 7/8 directly below the negative 4, because negative 4 represents a whole number, and 7/8 is a fraction. So it's really negative 4 and 0/8, and then 7/8. And because my signs are different, I'm going to need to subtract. And when I look at what I've set up, I can't take 7 away from 0. So I am going to borrow from this 4, borrowing 1 whole, which equals 3. So what I'm really doing is adding 1 whole onto 0/8. And it wouldn't make sense to write it as 1 like this, because then I would just tack that back onto the 3. 1 whole as a fraction in this scenario would be 8/8. That 8/8, I got the 8 from the denominator. So now I have negative 3 and 8/8, and I'm still left with the 7/8 over here. Again, since my signs right here are different, one is positive, one is negative, I am now going to take and subtract 7 from 8 to give me 1, and I'm left with just negative 3, so my answer is negative 3 1/8. Now taking that negative 3 1/8, I'd like to now add 1/2 to it. So if I have negative 3 1/8 and I add 1/2, again I'm going to set this up where I'm putting the number with the larger absolute value first. So I'll have the negative 3 1/8 plus 1/2. I do not have common denominators, so I will need to get a common denominator. Negative 3 1/8, 8 will be my common denominator. So 2 times 4 gives me 8, so 1 times 4 will just give me 4. Again, I cannot take 4 away from 1, so I will need to borrow here. So I'm going to borrow from this 3, and it will become a 2. And I'm adding on 8 eighths right here. So now I have negative 2. You add the 1 and the 8 to give you 9 eighths. And then I have 4 eighths. Sorry about that. Now, again, since my signs are different, I am going to subtract. 9 and 4 will give me 5 eighths. And then negative 2 minus 0 just gives me negative 2. So we've just talked about borrowing here. You also could change your numbers to improper fractions, but if you do that, you end up getting really large numbers very quickly, so be careful with that. So back to the notes. Number 4 is just strictly asking you to decide which one of these expressions would actually give us the answer. So go ahead, give that one a try. Okay, and the correct answer there I got was C, that at first it's 6:49 a.m., so that's starting that high tide. It goes down negative 2 8/10, and then at 12:47 p.m. it is now low tide, and then it will go back up. So we're adding the positive 1 8/10, because the negative 2 8/10 shows that the tide was going down. The positive 1 8/10 shows that we're moving up. To continue on that piece of paper, I have given you 6 more problems to practice. I'm asking that you work on these problems on the same paper that we just did the other examples on. Please don't use your calculators to solve the problems. If you like to use your calculator at the end, very, very end, to check your answers, you may, but we will go over these problems on Monday. Have a great weekend. I will see you later.